Thanks to Everand and Fable for working with me on today's video. More on them later.
Hello friends. For today's video, I wanted to have a very casual conversation about how reading every single day has impacted not just my reading habits, but has seeped into and altered my day-to-day life. I am somebody who, before doing this, I didn't used to read every single day. I always felt like a little bit of an outlier when it came to the book community, bookworms in general, as a lot of times you'll see if somebody's looking to make reading a habit, if somebody wants to get into reading, if that's a New Year's resolution, those sorts of things. Whenever they seek out advice as to how to get into reading, one of the things that people will point to frequently is that you should try to read every single day, even if it's just a couple pages. Just try to get a little bit of reading in every single day until it's not only a habit, but also inevitably you can tell yourself, I just need to read one page. That's all I need to do. But one page, usually you're like, I can read 5. And then you get to a part where there's maybe 2 more pages before it's the end of the chapter, and you're like, I can read to the end of the chapter. And you get to the end of the chapter, and you're like, well, now I want to know what happens next. And then suddenly you're flying through the book, and you're really engrossed in it, especially if it's a really good book. You get really sucked in, and then before you know it, you are becoming a reader. So I'm not in any way trying to diminish the value of that advice. I think it's very, very helpful for a lot of people to have reading become a quote-unquote habit, even though I think that labeling it as such kind of takes away a lot of what makes reading so significant to so many of us. I still, at the end of the day, think there's something to any hobby that you're getting into or any activity you're getting into, actually making it a part of your day-to-day life. So while I think that that's a really good bit of advice to give people getting into reading, new readers, however you want to frame it or however you've categorized yourself, for me, I have always approached reading pretty much like I approach all of my habits, which is obsessively. And I wanted to have this little experiment where I shifted a little bit how I utilize my time. One, because it goes against what's kind of like my natural instinct, and I wanted to see if going against that actually ended up resulting in me enjoying the process of reading, as well as, and this was a nice side effect, I'll say, of all of this, is will I enjoy my other hobbies more? How will it impact the amount of time I have in my day? How will it impact the amount I read? I just wanted to assess all of these things and be able to do so for an amount of time where I actually felt like I could see if there were changes. So I did this for 30 days straight. I read every single day for 30 days, which is very different for me. And I wanted to kind of juxtapose that to my previous habits. And so far, after 30 days, I have really, really liked this shift. I wanted to get into what these shifts were, what the unexpected changes were, and also some of the, I guess you could say, setbacks and cons. So the way I previously approached everything, I noted that I was very obsessive about things. So I want to dive into that first. It might be very different for some of you, or maybe some of what I'm about to say you resonate with completely. My husband is a person that I watch him. He always will read a little bit in the morning when he's getting his coffee, or if he takes our dog out for an early morning walk, he'll listen to a little bit of an audiobook. He's always been fantastic at being able to have a very set in stone schedule. You know, he wakes up at a certain time. He has a routine. He wakes up at a certain time, and it's not social media kind of routine. It's just the thing that works for him in the mornings. So I keep starting the sentence, but he'll wake up at basically the same time almost every single day. He makes his coffee, he eats his breakfast, kind of eases into his day. Like I said, he walks our dog, he takes a shower. He just does everything in a way that's not at all chaotic. It's so calming and peaceful. And for me, it's like, I've just not been like that for a while, and I think a lot of it has to do with how I grew up, and also I worked my way through school, so then I was always barely on any sleep, and then I have to wake up to go to school, and then I gotta go do this thing, and then I gotta go teach this private violin lesson, and then I gotta go to this thing for my student teaching, and it was just chaos all the time, so I felt like I never had a routine. I felt like a routine was not something that I had necessarily developed. It was always like the circumstances that I found myself in were dictating when I would do things, as opposed to me kind of sitting back and taking a little bit more, I guess, agency in my schedule. I will say I'll give my college self a break for that, because I really had no time at all. I worked all the time. I didn't live on campus, so I was driving to school all the time. But I think that's a very formative time for most people, is the ages of 18 to 25 when it comes to establishing a routine and a schedule. And I think what helps for a lot of people is having a job that has set hours or has some kind of structure to it. And I have not had that, because I, in college, was very, very busy. And then after that, my main job was teaching private violin lessons, and that changed from year to year, from week to week, depending on the availability of my students. When they got home from school, if I had an adult student, and they obviously would have a different schedule than the students that were kids, and where they lived and how far it took to get to their house. So things were always different from one day to the next. Didn't have much of a routine, didn't feel the need to have a routine, and I think there was a little part of me that was such a good student growing up that it felt almost rebellious, you could say, to be like, I'm just gonna wake up when I want to wake up. I'm gonna go to bed when I want to go to bed, because I actually finally had a chance to get some sleep, and I wanted to just, I guess, be a little reckless when it came to how I spent my time outside of working. Then and this is a sad shift, but when I was 26 to 27 is when I became my father's caretaker. And that is something that really, really shifts your ability to have any routine, because my dad was not doing well, and he had this little thing we got him where he would press a button, and it was almost like a doorbell sound. And so we'd go in and help him if it was the middle of the night, he needed help with something. As soon as he was up in the morning, I was up with him, wrapping his feet and his legs because of swelling and other such things, helping him with whatever he needed, and just taking it one day at a time. And this was all during 2020, so of course this was also in the middle of another major event that was happening globally. My husband was able to still maintain his routine that he pretty much had since we got married, because he worked for a grocery store. He still works for a grocery store. So he was able to kind of keep his routine. But for me, it was just, everything was very, very chaotic with my schedule. And then after that, once my father sadly passed away, then the sleep schedule completely shifted. So then I was up very, very late. I was oftentimes for hours at night. That's when I would work. It's when I would film videos. As after my husband went to bed, I would film, I would try to edit, and I would basically go almost sometimes until my husband woke up. Then I'd finally get knocked out just from being exhausted. And then I'd wake up, I'd be groggy, it's the middle of the day, trying to just go immediately into working again. So that's kind of what I mean by, it was a little chaotic for me. I'd watch him have this calm morning routine, and then I was kind of chaos. And a lot of it was the mourning process, grief. It's also still 2020. And then easing out of that for a few years after, it was difficult because I just got completely into this nocturnal schedule. That was almost a return to when I was in school, meaning when I was in college, because I worked at night after school, and then I'd wake up really, really early in the morning to try to study before exams and things like that. So I got in this weird schedule those years. Then I had I'm teaching private violin lessons, and my day-to-day schedule is different. And then everything with being my dad's caretaker. And then all of a sudden I'm becoming really nocturnal. And that for me was not, it was sustainable if I was by myself and I didn't have any friends or family. But most of the world does not operate at night. And for me, for my overall happiness, this is going to get back to reading, I promise, but I do feel like it's relevant. But for my overall joy and happiness and being able to embrace life with the people I care about, I thought, I have to figure out, I have to change my internal clock. I have to be able to shift back to waking up early and just being able to have a schedule that is more like what other people's are. I do want to note, not everybody needs to do this. I don't want to make it sound as though one time is better for other people. People function differently, people work differently, and also you never know what's going on in a person's life that might lead them to become out of sorts with basically what the quote-unquote rest of society, how the rest of society functions. So don't by any means want to imply that this is the right way to do things, but I felt for myself that I wasn't getting to spend the time with the people in my life the way I wanted to. But that's a little bit of setup as to what led to my schedule being so all over the place and me wanting to have maybe not a rigid, as I called it before, social media routine, but I wanted to get into a little bit more of a routine. So I managed to shift into having a little bit more of a normal person's routine when it came to going to bed, waking up, and like actually trying to attempt to do that like an adult. And so I finally was able to do that. But when it came to my work, because of how I was waking up, immediately going into working, then I'd spend time with my husband when he was home, and then when he would go to sleep, I'd go back to working, and it was just that on repeat. I always felt like I had to get as much done, which I do like working. I know that's not for everybody. I like my work. So I like working. I like reading. I like editing videos. And I like, actually, interestingly, the filming part is my least favorite. But I like editing. I like that part. I don't mind it's a little tedious, but I don't mind it. And I love the reading part. I love the analyzing literature and analyzing trends. I like all of those pieces quite a lot. So I liked my work, but I always felt like, okay, I got to get as much done before Sean gets home from work as possible. And that's my husband. And then he'd go to bed and it's like, okay, I got to get as much done now that Sean's asleep. And I just felt like it was going, I almost felt like when my husband was home, it was like a really long lunch break and that I had to just cram everything in, which wasn't necessarily true. If you look at the amount of time I had the time to not feel like I had to cram, but I also think I just had it in my head that because of everything that happened with the grieving period, so I just felt behind in life in a way you could say, or I felt like, okay, I literally am living with a person who's like got it together, and I don't feel like I have it together at all. So I always felt like I was scrambling. And again, I think that there is something to the external expectation that you function a certain way in order to be seen as mature, or like this is a sign of you having it again all together. And I felt like I didn't, even though I was keeping up with things, but I just wasn't happy with that. So making that shift was important, making that shift to kind of waking up at a more normal time, having an actual bedtime that wasn't 1, 2, 3, 4 in the morning. I definitely found that helped, but because of the habit that I had developed of having to do everything over the course of like these 4-hour chunks, I felt like, okay, this time period, this 4 to 5 hours is going to be when I read, and I'll read until I can't keep my eyes open, or this is when I'm going to get all my editing done, or this is when I'm going to get all the filming done. I would block things out like that. And I think blocking schedules out can work. Depends on the activity, depends on what you're doing, depends on what your goals are. It can be helpful, but it meant that I was starting to only allow myself really to read when I felt like I had this huge time block, instead of like, yeah, you can take some 20, 30 minutes, whatever, to read, and then you can go into this other thing. I just always felt like I had to get this huge chunk of things done before I can move on to the next thing. And this does fit into just kind of, I guess you could call it a personality type. I'm not sure exactly how to categorize this, but since I was a kid, my hobbies were always ones that I could do in isolation and I could do for hours. So I love to draw, I love to write, I love to play video games, I love to play my violin. I can do those things pretty much all day long. So you get me sucked in and just be like, okay, well, you're invested in that. I'll see you tomorrow. I've always been somebody that could do that. And the same goes for reading. So because I could just sit and read for hours and hours and hours at a time, I thought, well, this is a strength for me. And especially because it relates to my job, it's a good thing that I can just read for 6, 7 hours and pretty much not stop. I think that sounds like a good thing, right? And it was just so hard for me to shift into breaking this up into a way where it's like, actually instead, because it's not feasible to read 6 hours every single day. I have plenty of other things to do with my work. And because the actual editing aspect of things, filling out the description bar, getting all the links, all that stuff, because it's so time consuming, even though it's tedious, but it's time consuming, it's not realistic to try to read that much every single day. I have to get other things done for my job. So I thought, if I'm gonna read every single day, that means I have to cut back. I can't do those huge blocks. Maybe every now and then if I'm ahead in other work, I can maybe sometimes have a reading day, we'll call it, but I need to try to be comfortable reading for 10 minutes. And like, even just saying it in my head, even though I've been doing it now for a month, in my head, it's still like, it sounds so weird because I'm just like, that's such a short amount of time to read. And I just wanted to get past that. I wanted to make an effort to get past that and just see how it changed things, because I want to get to a point where I can do a little bit here, a little bit there, and genuinely feel like, okay, that was a good amount. Now let's shift into doing this other thing. A few things that helped me ensure that I was consistently reading every single day. So there's a handful of things that I did. One is that I had what some people call their pile of possibilities. So there's a lot of book lingo online. If you're new and you maybe aren't as into book content. I'll go through some of these kind of quickly. So there's things like TBRs, which stands for to be read. And then a pile of possibilities is when usually you have a really large TBR. You'll always hear bookworms be like, oh, so many books, so little time to read. Never ending TBR. You'll have this huge amount of books that you want to read. And then so a lot of times what people will do is they'll make a monthly TBR. These are the books I want to get around to this month. And I think a lot of readers are a little ambitious and we put too many things on our monthly TBRs. And then there are people that have found this middle ground where they'll have books that are on their TBRs. So let's say there's 20 books that they're like, these are books I'm interested in reading. Maybe I'll read some of these this month. So they're kind of narrowing it down. There's still books that they want to read that they've had on their radar for a while. But by having a little bit more flexibility, it allows for them to mood read a little bit. It's the kind of perfect in between for people that like structure and people that like to mood read. And I felt like that was perfect for me because I love to plan. That's another thing I can do for hours at a time, is just sit and look at a schedule and just plan things out, and probably overly plan, but I just love it. But then at the same time, I had this word of the day, chaotic, actual way of going about things. And it wasn't the easiest to balance, and a tiny bit sometimes I want to be a mood reader. Sometimes if I'm in the mood for something, I'm like, ugh, I really want to pick this up, but I really got to get around to this because of my schedule, but I really want to read this other thing over here. So I didn't want that to be as much of a factor of I have to hold myself down to I have to read this certain thing. I wanted to have a list of books that I was wanting to pick up, the pile of possibilities, but then allow for that flexibility to be integrated in. That I found exceptionally helpful because then whatever I was hoping to pick up that day, I was like, I'm going to read this, I'm going to read some of this. And then another factor is because I would read for large chunks at a time previously, I had to abandon the idea that when I started a book, I was finishing that book either that day or the next day. And that is how I go about, or how I was going about nearly everything. And it still doesn't quite compute in my brain, even though I've been doing it for a bit here, but just only reading a little bit and then being like, that book, I'm putting that book down and then I'll pick it up tomorrow. Like that, to just put it down and be like, yeah, I might be reading the same book for a week is just so against what I am accustomed to. And I had to allow for that. I had to accept that sometimes I'm going to pick up a book and I'm not going to finish it, and that's okay. Also trying to ensure, because one thing that has stayed consistent with a thing that I like to do is immersion reading, which is when you listen to an audiobook and you read the physical copy, oftentimes at the exact same time, hence the immersion factor, because you're incorporating different things. You're listening and what you're doing visually. So it's kind of tying in multiple functions at the same time. And I really like to immersion read. I found that this was still helpful for me. So something that I tried to do was ensure that I always had a physical copy available and an audiobook copy. This is, of course, not going to be something that is even an option for everybody. And some books don't have audiobooks. I'll get to that in a moment, actually, because that played a role as well. But I found that in trying to plan ahead to ensure, okay, what books do I want to pick up where I can have both available to me, this was really helpful as well. This is where apps like Everand helped quite a bit, because I like to, as much as possible, get my audiobooks through my library apps, but sometimes the ones that don't have holds, those ones don't have as much available. So then things like Libby, which do have holds, even though it's a digital file, they don't always have things when maybe I want to pick them up. And the way Everand works is that if you want to pick something up, you have 3 unlocks every single month, and you can use those unlocks, and then they actually will reset. So the next month you'll get 3 unlocks, but they don't roll over. And I actually found that the not rolling over encouraged me to find things that maybe weren't available through my library and be like, okay, I do want to read this, so I'm going to use this Everand unlock for this particular thing that I want to pick up. And then that way I have the audiobook available to me and the physical copy. So that was really helpful. Immersion reading in general is just another thing that could probably be its own video topic. But I did find that having the immersion reading be something I could consistently partake in was really helpful. Another thing to factor in for me was that because of how I would have the structure of I'm going to read this book today, and then if it's a longer book, I'll finish it tomorrow, maybe the 3rd day after that. But for the most part, I'm going to read this book over the course of these couple of days. I found that in doing that, I was not somebody who typically read multiple things at the same time. And this is something that shifts from person to person, whether they like doing this or not. For me, it depends on what I'm reading. There are certain books that I can easily put down and come back to, and I can read something else in the meantime, and it's no big deal. There are other books where that's not as much of an option. And so I think I had to be more aware of this for myself than I maybe in the past would have been. But that wasn't a very difficult thing to factor in. You can usually tell if a book is, for example, like a contemporary romance. That's something I can easily put down and pick back up, because it's not like I have to remind myself of all this intricate world building and who's who. It's not this multiple perspective epic necessarily. And also assessing when it seems like something is going to be more thematically dense or the writing is maybe a little more formal. Those are the ones that, okay, when I pick that up, I'm going to want to ensure that I'm not reading other things at the same time. Unless the other thing I'm reading is the contemporary romance, then that's fine. But just kind of finding a balance of, if I'm going to read multiple things at the same time, recognizing when that's realistic versus when that is going to be to the detriment of the reading experience, which I always really, that's a huge priority to me, is the ensuring of quality of reading, not just the time spent reading, but the actual how engrossed in the story I am. Because of the fact that I review books, I don't want to have it where it's like, I don't really remember what I just read, but it's fine. I don't really want to do that, because I am reviewing things, I'm relaying information back to all of you, and I'm making money doing it. So on principle, I don't like when I don't allow for that. If I'm not paying attention, I'm like, I gotta go back, I gotta rewind, I gotta reread, I gotta start over, whatever the case may be. And obviously that's inefficient too, and because it is a thing that's tied to work, efficiency matters, otherwise I'll get behind. So I had to really pay attention to when the things I was picking up, because I wasn't going to be finishing them in a short amount of time, I had to be really mindful of what I was picking up and when. And then this, I think, ties into another factor, which is I have a lot of different stories I like to consume. I like reading manga, and I like books, and then I've mentioned I like video games, I like watching anime, I like having the analysis of different kinds of stories. I also think it broadens the ways that understanding the ways that stories can be told, and the different forms of storytelling from one medium to the next, also the pros and cons and the weaknesses and the strengths of various different things. So because I like to consume a lot of different kinds of stories, I found that trying to balance out that was significant for me as well. As an example, I've recently started, and this is kind of it's not quite the same as picking up a comic or a manga, but I have started reading the Apothecary Diaries light novels. I had watched the anime for this, now I'm going back and reading these. And this doesn't have an audiobook, so this is something I could only pick up physically. I'm very familiar with the story because of the anime. So going back to this, it is just words, but I found that it was something I could just read here and there, and that was so beneficial. Having something that I really could just comfortably put down and then go into something else, and I didn't feel like I was losing something with the process of doing that, that was really important to building the habit of actually reading every single day. And then another thing that was really helpful I found was, because I like making to-do lists and I like the checking off or the highlighting, because I like to do written to-do lists. So just that process of crossing something off is always very satisfying to me. So the Fable app, which is what I like to use for tracking my reading, what's nice about the Fable app is there's this calendar view. And within the calendar view, whenever you mark, like, I read today, and then you can mark which books you picked up that day, what it'll do is it will show you on the calendar the books. It'll have a cover image of that book or multiple books that you read for each of the days. And then it will also keep track, like, this is your reading streak currently. You've read for this many days. And it's just like that equivalent of crossing the thing on your to-do list off, where it's just kind of a little dopamine where you're like, yay. That was kind of a very silly, but I found visually helpful tool for myself. So to kind of sum up this area, using the library app and libraries in general, Everand was helpful for the things that weren't available from my library, but also I had multiple options because they have the 3 unlocks, and because of the time frame where they don't roll over, I found it was like, okay, I got to actually use these, so that was nice. And then the Fable app was helpful in assessing and being able to visualize the actual reading streak and okay, here I go, and it kind of helps motivate you further. And then the really having to be okay with reading multiple things, not getting through everything in a a shorter amount of time, that's okay. I can put something down and pick something else back up, and then I'll finish that one thing, and then I can mark it as finished. And then being able to do that was really helpful. And then having the things that are very, very familiar to you, you could almost categorize it as different genres, so to speak. I feel like that really helped in ensuring it didn't feel like I was piling different stories on top of each other in a way that became too tangled together, but rather they felt very, very distinct and separate, and thus it was very easy for me to engage in both things and enjoy going between the both of them. Now getting into the results of all of this, interestingly, I think overall I actually read less, which might seem like it proved to be a giant failure, because by reading every day, you would think you're reading every day, so you're going to be reading more. But because of how I was going about things previously, I would get through stuff, and that's not my goal. My goal isn't to get through things. It was just how I went about the process of reading resulted in me completing works, I would say, in a more timely manner. However, that feeling that I described before of always feeling behind because I was doing things in time blocks and really, really big time blocks, I found that feeling persisted when I read things in a shorter amount of time. Whereas now, by allowing myself to read for shorter amounts of time, but more frequently, even if in the end I'm not reading as much, I'm still ensuring I get reading in a lot. And I feel like I just have all the time in the world in a strange way, because by not having these huge time blocks, I can sit and film a video, I can edit a video, and then I can read for a little while my video is exporting. And then I can, once the video is done exporting, I can go back to working on the video. And then once it's actually loading on to YouTube, I can read a little bit more. And being able to do a little bit here and there, I feel kind of caught up more than usual on most everything. This is obviously, I think it's important to note, a self-employed thing. When you're self-employed and you're your own boss and you make your own schedule, I think there's this never-ending chase to be as efficient as possible, but also to not just be efficient for time's sake, but to really ensure you're getting the most out of what you're doing if you like your job, which I do. And so for me, this is certainly, I think, an example of that. And I enjoy, like, I actually find I'm coming through my work days so happy because I feel like I'm accomplishing so much. Like, I read this today, and then I edited these 2 videos, and then I did prep for this other thing, and then I'm working a little bit on this video essay I want to do, and it just feels like I have time for everything, and I'm getting things done. And sure, I'm not getting one thing done in one day, like reading an entire book, but it just feels better. I feel happier. And then at the end of my workday, when I sit to do something else, I don't feel like, oh geez, now I have all this other stuff that I gotta really do tomorrow. I don't feel like that as much. I feel like by doing a little bit every single day, which is, I know, very obvious, but by doing a little bit every single day, it does build, and then it turns into you're actually pretty ahead instead of today I'm doing this, today I'm doing this, today I'm doing this. Oh no, I now have to go back to doing this over here. And it just feels better overall. So even though I read less, which seems like the opposite of what you wanted, even though I read less in the form of pages read, I feel like I have accomplished more. And this is why I started by saying how it has trickled into my day-to-day life, because my day-to-day life is happier and I feel way better when it comes to my work. Also, it allowed for me to read more broadly, which is something I've been wanting to do, not just necessarily other genres, because I think because I read so much fantasy that's kind of the initial takeaway is when I say more broadly, I mean other genres, which I did take part in that as well. But it's also a matter of reading for different video projects I'm working on. So the never-ending, steampunk video that I was always talking about, I could read something for that a little bit. And then maybe I'm reading something for my Apothecary Diaries read-along that I'm hosting. And then maybe I have this buddy read that I'm doing, so now I'm picking that up. And then here's something for patrons. And I felt like I could bounce around, and it didn't feel like I was behind. Instead, it just felt like, okay, today I'm going to do this a little bit, and then I'm going to make progress on this over here, and then I finished this thing over here, so now I have more time for these other things, and then what's the next thing I want to pick up? And it just felt like a breath of fresh air. It felt so nice, and I have always enjoyed my reading. I don't want it to come across like I haven't in the past, but I really feel like I enjoy reading more by making it a habit more often. On that note, I overall would say this was a big success. I am so happy to have made reading a part of my day-to-day life. It's very different from what I'm accustomed to, but I am really, really liking it. And I'm also really grateful for apps like Everand and Fable because I do think that they were really helpful in the process as well. Of course, the library is enormously helpful. But let me know, what has been your history with whether you read every day or you read here and there? Whatever your habits are with reading, I'm interested to know. What are some habits you have but goals that you want to have for yourself? And just in general, was there anything here that you resonated with, connected with, or you found you're entirely different with? Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.